So I'm very excited to introduce Jonathan Schooler. I met him at the first Consciousness Hacking Santa Barbara meetup. Jonathan is a professor at UC Santa Barbara. He has a lab called the Meta Lab, which is doing really a wide range of incredibly interesting neuroscience and psychological research. And he's also involved in another lab called the Tank Lab, which is actually looking at the way in which the brain responds to stimuli before the stimuli actually happens. And this is a great representation of Jonathan. And he told a little bit of his story when we met for the first time, and that's when I knew he is truly a consciousness hacker at heart. He is truly walking the walk and talking the talk of academia, and has found a very respected and prestigious position there, very well published, doing incredible research, but at the same time, in his heart, he really is maintaining an open, completely extensive interest in what is consciousness, what is the space of human potential, how are we really interacting with and affecting the world around us. And so he's almost living this double life in a way. And so we are very, very lucky to have him here to hear some of his insight about the relationship between technology, science, and consciousness. So thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you. I was racing to get here, and I'll be racing to get through my talk, so the race continues. But I do anticipate going to sort of giving you a little bit of both sides of the perspectives that I like to explore. So today, I want to talk about how technology can be used to illuminate and foster consciousness. And I'm going to talk about three strands that are related in the sense that they're all about technology and illuminating and fostering consciousness, but they're very different in terms of their goals. The first line of research that I want to talk about involves looking at a training program that we've done to enhance mindfulness, and then looking at the impact of that training program on a great variety of different measures as well as on the brain. The second is a software program that I've been involved in developing that's commercially available to clinicians that serves to help clinicians keep track of their patients and help them improve more quickly. And then finally, I want to let my hair down and talk about some pretty wild speculations about how subjectivity may relate to reality, and using various technological simulations to try to demonstrate that. Okay, so here goes. Last year we did the year before last, we've now done this the second time, something known as the Summer Intensive Transformation Program, which is a 6-hour-a-day, 5-day-a-week for 6-week program with a waitlist control that is comprehensive in nature, involving lifestyle intervention that involves a great variety of different things, including meditation every day for about an hour and a half, yoga every day, exercise every day, and then also instruction about compassion, nutrition, the mental sets associated with mindfulness that can be helpful, and so on. And our question was, if we throw the kitchen sink at people and then we measure all the different things that can change, how much change can we observe, and do we find a relationship between these various different variables? What do we measure? We measured a whole lot. We measured physiological measures such as cardiovascular fitness, muscular endurance, cholesterol and triglyceride levels. Cognitive measures, including working memory, reading comprehension, response inhibition, and creativity. And then mindfulness and well-being measures such as mindfulness, mind wandering, which is a particular interest of mine, stress, life satisfaction, self-esteem, and self-efficacy. And then we also, every one of these individuals was also put in an fMRI scanner and we measured their brain state when they were simply at rest. And we were able to look at what regions are connected to what other regions. And in particular, there's one region that I've been very interested in. We've done a lot of research on this, known as the default network. How many people have heard of the default network? I'm just curious. Okay, so you know this is a major region, and it's associated with daydreaming. It's associated with not being in the present. And so the question is, when people have been practicing mindfulness, how does that connect to other regions of the brain? Okay, so what did we find? All right, this is a busy slide, and I've been told to try to not make this super data intensive, but this is actually pretty easy to, even though the letters are small, this is effect sizes, large, medium, and small. And I have to tell you that a lot of effect sizes in psychology, you may have heard this, they tend to hover in the small range. And so you don't see large effect sizes in psychology that often. The first thing to notice here is just look at how big these effect sizes are. Many of these are in the humongous effect size range. So let's look at some of the different variables that we looked at. First, we looked at health, things such as muscular endurance and cardiovascular endurance, major, massive changes in performance on these measures in the manipulation condition, those who receive the sit compared to the weightless control. Now let's look at mental abilities. Again, tremendous improvements in task focus, so less mind wandering, improvements in working memory performance, reading comprehension. These people were much more able to be present, to be focused, to concentrate. No change, interestingly, in creativity, and this is, I won't really get into this now, but there is a little bit of a trade-off between being in the present and being the absent-minded creative professor. So I sort of struggle with this myself, I have to admit. But we do see tremendous improvement on a number of different mental abilities. And then look at mindfulness and well-being. Here we have mood. People are off the charts improvement in these measures, reduced stress, really across the board, except for compassion, very large effects. And then lastly, changes in a number of different brain regions in terms of the resting state connectivity. And the short version of this is that when people were engaging in this practice for 6 weeks, they tended to show regions that were more associated with internal awareness, more associated with sensory awareness, less associated with the default network. And I'll just show you one slide here, which basically looks at the change in the connectivity of the default network to the somatosensory area. That's the area that's associated with external processing. And you basically see less connectivity following the intervention. And this change in connectivity was predictive both of mindfulness, so the greater the change in this connectivity of the default network, the greater mindfulness they were, and the greater their cognitive performance. So this seems to be a really major element, and it suggests that they shifted from a self-referential processing, always thinking about themselves and sort of lost in their head, to more present moment awareness, which seems to have been really critical. So in some, also just testimonials. These are some of the things that the participants in this said. This was the best thing I've ever experienced. I came in as a skeptic. I certainly didn't think I would change my life in 6 weeks, but I learned to take control of my mind. It has made me happier, stronger, healthier, and more focused. And there were lots more of these. These really seem to change people's lives. And we did a 6-week follow-up, and most of these variables continued. So in summary, in terms of mindfulness in the brain, we found that an intensive, multifaceted mind-body program can lead to unprecedented gains in health, cognitive capacities, and well-being. And using technology, we're able to see how these changes were represented in terms of the way that different regions of the brain were connected to each other. So that's chapter 1, talking about how mindfulness in the brain can be understood through the technology of fMRI. Chapter 2, enhancing mental health. So I'd like to tell you about a new software that is available for clinicians. This is, but also potentially can be used for coaches. It's known as mobile therapy. You can find it at mobiletherapy.com. And what this software allows clinicians to do is a number of different things. First, they can register their patients in terms of their various different details. This is a very easy thing to do. And then they are able to track various different things that are happening in their patients' lives. One of the big challenges with therapy is that you don't see the patient for a week, oftentimes two, and when they come back, you rely exclusively on the patient's memory of what happened in between. And so this means that all the cognitive distortions that we know that are associated with memory can play an important role. What this application does is it keeps track of people's activities, their well-being. It pings them throughout the day and asks them what's going on. I'll show you some of the screens at night. And then it allows the therapist to track changes, to see what variables are associated with what other variables, and to really provide a much more of a close understanding of what's really going on in these patients' lives. So it's all downloadable on smartphones, and it interrupts people when they've entered a new situation and asks them, because it also is connected to GPS, various different questions. These are customizable, and we have various different modules for different things, such as PTSD, anxiety, and so on. And then also clinicians can write their own questions. It also makes it very easy with icons to enter the different activities that people are doing. It keeps track and recognizes places that you've been. And then there's also an end of the day, which allows you to ask a number of questions. And then also critically, it allows people to enter text to describe the experiences. Importantly, all of this there's a dashboard for the clinician, which allows them to, at a moment's glance, see some of the major things that have happened to the patient over the week. They can look at the various different values on the different measures that they were looking at and get a quick understanding of what's going on. And then it also allows them to do much more systematic analysis. They can look at particular variables that they're concerned about and see how that's been changing, identify trigger points, and so on. And this approach is really allowing clinicians, we think it's going to be a true game changer in terms of allowing clinicians to provide better care for their patients using technology to better understand what's happening to the patients from week to week and what are the trigger variables that are most problematic and how can they correct those through understanding what's going on in their lives. Okay, so we've made it through perfect. We've made it through the sort of more data-oriented side of the talk. And now I invite you to sit back, open your minds, because I'm going to be pushing the envelope a little bit here. So now we're talking about visualizing the subjective dimension of reality. So I want you to just imagine that you just popped into the world just right now, just out of the blue, boom, you're here, you're just like, whoa, what am I? And what do you know? What is just self-evident just from reflecting on your own experience? You don't need to ask your neighbor. It's just self-evident truths. And I want to argue that there are 3 self-evident truths. So see if these work for you. The first one, experience exists. If you pop into existence and you go, wow, what's going on? You're having an experience. That is it seems to me, irrefutable. And this, of course, is the critical idea behind Descartes' I think, therefore I am. Simply having experience, you might be a brain in a vat. This could all be a dream. Gremlins, demons could be setting all sorts of illusions up for you, but you're still having an experience. It may be an illusory experience, but it's an experience. So that's 1. 2, experience is defined by change. Right? That is what experience is. You have an experience because it's slightly different. And so time flows seems to be the second absolutely self-evident aspect of existence. And then third, experience is always now. It's now. What time is it now? Now. It's always now. So it's always now. We always reside in the present. These seem to me to be facts that are true, is self-evident to me. In fact, frankly, they are more self-evident to me than reality itself. I really could be dreaming right now. Each one of you, well, you're not not, because if anyone's dreaming, I happen to know it's me. But from your perspective, you happen to know it's you. So that is a self-evident thing. All these facts and stuff, they're not as certain as that. So these, I would argue, are self-evident truths. Now, herein lies the rub. Oops, we're going the wrong way. Time just flew the wrong direction there. Science provides absolutely no way of conceptualizing the three things of which I am most certain: experience, the flow of time, the uniqueness of now. These things, they really can't fit in at all. They don't know what to do with it. In fact, major serious researchers have argued that all of these things, Daniel Dennett and others have argued that experience is an illusion, and the current view in physics is that the flow of time and the uniqueness of now are illusions. And I think this suggests the need for scientific humility and also for, let's just think, maybe something else could be going on here. So, Einstein said the past, the present, and future are illusions, of stubborn ones. And Paul Davies said nothing in known physics corresponds to the passage of time. Indeed, physicists insist that time doesn't flow at all, it merely is. So this is really, physics reject the flow of time. They say now appears to move from one moment to the next in a steady flow, but this is an illusion. Now, why do they say that? This is so self-evident. How could they possibly say this? Well, the reason is that they think about time, and this is due to relativity theory, as the equivalent of another spatial dimension. So that we're actually, right now you are in this coordinate in space-time, now you're in this coordinate, now you're in this coordinate. So there's this whole block universe. But the problem is, time has now been taken up as a spatial dimension. So you can't move in it, because movement requires time. You have to move in time and time. We're short a degree of freedom. That's really the big problem. So here is an everyday experience. Well, maybe not that every day, but here's an experience. And now here's what that experience looks like in the block universe. I've just taken every frame. This is incidentally using virtual reality software, and so you could actually stand in this. We'll be playing with this more in a minute. But every one of those frames is now stretched out in the block, and this is the block universe. You can't move in it because it's all there at once, and time has now been spatialized. So what's missing? What's the critical part? The degree of freedom necessary to enable an observer to move through objective time, and here comes the key hypothesis. Perhaps experience corresponds to an additional dimension of subjective time that provides the degree of freedom necessary to enable consciousness to move in relationship to physical time. So what I'm positing here is the equivalent of another dimension of reality. And so this is like Flatland, where two dimensions was encountered, a two-dimensional world was encountered by a sphere, and this seemed entirely anomalous. Absolutely brilliant book. I recommend that you consider it. Since Flatland, there have been lots of postulations of additional dimensions. It turns out that when things are really anomalous, considering another dimension is a good thing to consider. This was really sort of the essence of relativity theory. And string theory, I won't unpack this, but string theory has now got us up to 11 dimensions. So if you can draw on suggesting additional dimensions to get yourself out of a quandary, it seems like possibly a subjective dimension of time might be worth considering. I'm not the only person who suggested this. Andre Lin said perhaps consciousness, like space-time, has its own intrinsic degrees of freedom. So let me give you an intuition about what that would be like. So in the normal block universe, you crunch the two dimensions of space down, the three dimensions of space down into two, right? That's how you get those slices like that. Now what I've done is to crush it down into one. So we just have one dimension of physical space and one dimension of objective time, and you can see the poor flat observer. There's nowhere for the observer to move because all moments are there simultaneously. But now what we're going to do is introduce another dimension, a dimension of subjective time. And now we have the degree of freedom to allow this observer to move in subjective time relative to objective time. So with the addition of another dimension, you're no longer stuck in the pancake of Flatland of the block universe. Now it's possible to move. And this also provides a now. The now is the current moment, your current moment in subjective time relative to objective time. Let me show you this back to that block universe that I showed. Again, no way to move, but when we add another dimension, now you can move through the block universe. And look how form and function and dynamic quality emerges when you have this additional dimension. And we can tie these two dimensions, these two things together. So this is a mapping of the one representation that I showed with the other. So every step corresponds to another step in the block universe. So this is basically the idea that we are moving through the block universe relative to subjective time. Okay, just a few more concepts that I think are really helpful. Here's a concept you may, how many people have heard of the term holon? Raise your hands. Oh, this is a good community. That's awesome. Okay, so holon is a term that Arthur Koestler introduced, but Wilbur has used it more recently. That may be where a number of you have heard about it. A holon is something that is simultaneously a whole and a part. It shares a common structure and multiple frames of objective time, hierarchically organized invariant structure. And if you think about it, that's what the universe is. The universe is basically filled of holon upon holon upon holon. So we have atoms, molecules, cells, organs, peoples, planet, galaxies. Everything basically involves smaller structures orbiting around larger structures, and those structures orbiting around larger ones, and so on. So here is a pretty cool demonstration. Again, this was done with the virtual reality, so you could actually step into this world and experience the holon. So here we see the holons, and now these holons, this becomes part of a larger holon. Each one of these little ones become part of a larger one, and then we're going to zoom out, and then you can readily imagine how this then could be part of yet a larger holon, and so on. We'll just do a little bit of zooming. If you want, maybe later on when you're asking questions, I'll put it back and we can travel through the holon some more. But so the idea now is that once we have this concept of holons, and the block universe and subjective time, the idea is that we can move through, this is what's happening, is we're basically moving through subjective time relative to objective time as consciousness sort of unpacks all the different holons that it encounters. So here what I've done is I've created another block universe, but in this block universe, rather than the frames being breaking glasses, the frames are just these frames of an individual slice of moving through the holon structure. Notice that when you're standing still, when there's no movement, it's absolutely meaningless. And this is another sort of hint that the flow of time is really critical to the emergence of subjective experience. So nothing's happening. But now, when we enter this realm and we move through it, all of a sudden, form and structure emerges. So what we're imagining here is this is the present. This is a moment of subjective time stepping up. Again, I can't get all the dimensions going simultaneously, but you can basically see how once we're moving through this block universe with this additional dimension of subjective time, all of a sudden form and structure is able to emerge. And you could also use this same technology and use any image of any sort. So this really has great potential. Now, in addition to physical holons, you can also think about subjective holons. So it seems that we may have multiple systems, each of which have their own possibly separate experiential levels. So neurons might have their own subjective experience, and they then neuron assemblies, maybe they have their experience. Networks may have their own experience, and then the self is back further on. There's some interesting evidence which actually suggests that the earlier systems are processing information earlier in time, so there may actually be some stepping back in objective time as we get larger and larger. And so we can then imagine these subjective holons are actually moving through and unpacking the block universe. So, and keep in mind that each one of the smaller holons, or subjective holons, is unpacking the smaller physical holons, and larger subjective holons are able to unpack larger physical holons. And it may be that as human beings, we have created a capacity for seeing the really big holons. And perhaps as we continue to evolve as a species, we'll be able to step further and further back and be able to see more and more vast holons. Potentially, this may relate to interesting aspects in physics. Some of you may be familiar with the many worlds theory of physics, which has this bizarre quality of the universe branching off every time an observation is made. And the claim here is that it may not be that we are actually going down every one of those paths. Rather, there's a wave of consciousness which is moving through this block multiverse, unpacking one particular frame as it goes. So each alternate universe corresponds to a different vector in a second temporal dimension, and it's possible that consciousness actually allows us to select our alternative futures and possibly thereby providing room for free will. Okay, So I've used technology to provide a speculative model of consciousness here. It integrates consciousness into physical reality. It conceptualizes the flow of time, stepping up an additional subjective dimension. It illustrates the hierarchical nature of physical systems, particularly focusing on this idea of physical holons. It also conceptualizes the hierarchical nature of subjective experience and subjective holons. And it allows us to speculate on the possibility of consciousness perhaps even larger than ourselves. So I showed you those subjective holons before, but perhaps there might be holons even behind us. Perhaps society has some sort of subjective experience. Perhaps there may be even larger holons behind that and larger holons behind that. So it allows us to possibly situate ourselves in an even larger context of subjectivity. If you're interested in learning more or getting involved, let me point you in various different directions. We are in the process of establishing a new center, the Center for Mindfulness and Human Potential, that will be looking at introducing mindfulness into the schools, developing technology to enhance mindfulness, and we are very interested in finding collaborators on that. So if you're interested in learning more about that, please contact me. We also have, as I mentioned, mobile therapy. And this is available for a free trial if you're interested in trying that out. And then lastly, if you want to learn more about visualizing the subjective dimension of reality, I invite you to take a look at our website, the Meta Lab. Go to the area under metaphysics and you'll find a number of papers, and in particular this one here, Bridging the Objective-Subjective Divide, which introduces a number of the concepts that I talked about today. Okay. That's it. I'd be happy to take questions.
So you can take.
Okay. Yes.
And maybe wait for the microphone.
So I would like to maybe challenge your third axiom of experience happening in the now. I know a lot of experiments that show that the brain actually has a lot of different timelines, and that it sort of backdates experience to a certain arbitrary sort of fake now. So.
Okay, so what I would say is that I agree with that, and that's because I actually think that those earlier parts in the system, V1 and so on, their now is actually a little earlier than our now. So their experience is in their now, which is just 50 or 100 milliseconds ahead of your experience, which is in your now. So every subjective experience is always in the now. It's just that not all subjective experiences are necessarily in the same now.
I agree.
Let's see. Yes.
Very much appreciative of your reference to Kessler and Wilber's work on holons. A lot of people have been trying to unpack that work. I actually was just at the recent Meta-Integral Theory conference a few weeks ago. If anyone was there, it'd be great to talk to you afterwards. But doing that work for over a decade has given a lot of people a very sort of humble sense of the difficulties of dealing with reductionism, and hence the need for a conceptual model that holds the holographic universe together. In a robust way that allows for philosophical discourse like this to take place. How do you deal with challenges of reductionism in dealing with mindfulness and neuroscience? And I do want to give a nod to Evan Thompson's work. He just published a really great body of work on the problems of over-neuralizing and computationalizing a lot of mindfulness research, and the tail wagging the dog, and you get really stuck on all the maps and models coming, which are really rich and seductive in a way. But I'd love to hear anything you have to say on that.
Evan Thompson is a good friend of mine. We actually spent a week together at a really fun retreat that was a meditation retreat with philosophers. It's a little bit frustrating to be surrounded by philosophers who you can't talk to. But after we did the meditation retreat, then we were able to talk with one another. It was really stimulating. And one of the things that oftentimes happens that gives the non-reductionist perspective a bad name is that there seems to be sort of a lack of precision associated with people who have been endorsing the sort of New Age kind of perspective. And that creates a serious problem, because there's logical difficulties, and they're just not being rigorous in their thinking. And so one of the really important things to do is to, if one wants to maintain an interest in these things, is to really be as absolutely rigorous as possible. And so that's what I've been trying to do in my talk here and in my career, is to really carry the torch of advancing the empirical agenda. And in this paper here, I talk a lot about the ways in which we've used first-person or third-person measures, various different cognitive neuroscience measures to understand first-person experience. So I think that once you really establish rigorous credibility, that gives you then a platform to be able to talk to the reductionists in a way that they can't dismiss you out of hand. I just gave a talk day before yesterday to a group in Pennsylvania with Marty Seligman was there. Many of you may know him. And he wouldn't have necessarily been willing to listen to this, but he basically said that he was delighted. He said that it was brave, and then I'd gotten to a point where I deserved to be able to talk about these things. So what I would encourage people to do is really try to be as rigorous as possible. Do your homework. Know the answers to those questions, and then if you still hold those views, which I think you will, because these are real problems, then you really have a good vantage. Sorry, I took too long on that question, but thank you for asking. Let's see, let me go on this side. Yes?
I really like your approach. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think you're tackling something that ordinary science and philosophy have either avoided or not dealt with very well. But I also think that there's actually a database showing that the universe is very different from how it's construed in a 3D or even mechanical 4D dimension, and that is that the data of parapsychology, particularly the work of Dean Radin at the Ions Institute, shows that people actually can respond to something prior to it even being selected as the event that they're then going to run into. So the existence of precognition, psychokinesis, retrocognition, telepathy is all illustrative of a connectivity that's not implied in any of the universe's models of the universe so far. I'd be interested in your response to this.
Sure. Well, I have been, I've in fact been actively conducting parapsychological research in my lab for the last eight or 9 years. I have to say that I would have thought after 8 or 9 years of research on the topic, I would have made up my mind either one way or the other. And the fact of the matter is that I'm still find myself, having carefully read the literature and actually engaged in the research myself, I still find myself not 100% persuaded by it, although I still think it is very deserving of additional research. I'm trying now to organize there's also research you may know by Daryl Bem that was published in the journal Personality and Social Psychology. I was a reviewer on that paper. I'm trying to get a large-scale replication effort by both skeptics and believers, whatever the word is.
Will get positive results.
Right. I think that's and that there is some research which suggests that, but I'd like to see that done. And you also need to make sure that it was not. You have to be very careful to make sure that there are not any ways for them to influence the data. But let me just say a few things about. Two things further. One is that once you speculate about another temporal dimension and that consciousness is associated with it, this actually does provide an opportunity to accommodate these types of anomalous results. And I think in the end, it's going to be that kind of evidence that will really change the thing. And I can imagine that even though we are, the subjective experience is here, that there may be subjective holons in the future, where I was already talking about that. It's built into the model. So those future subjective holons could be faintly sensitive to things, and this would explain why we don't usually have a clear view of the future. It seems to be much more of this tacit sort. Yes?
We have time for two more quick questions. One, very quick questions.
Always do that to me. During the psychedelic experience, you can have a direct experience of the Hugh Everett many worlds hypothesis. do you have any comments on that? I gave a talk about this at a Science and Non-Duality conference last year. Yeah.
Let's see. I would say that it's probably not a coincidence that many of the people who have been pushing the envelope on these types of issues have experimented with hallucinogens. I think that they do offer a perspective on the nature of reality, on the way it seems as if time can actually stop, as if you've taken all of your vector and moved it in the subjective dimension and are not even moving in the objective dimension. So I think that there's a lot of parallels between the insights that come from psychedelics and the kind of model that I was presented here, and that's not entirely coincidental. Last question. Let's see. Yes, back there.
Speaking of Dean Radin, I've been involved a little bit with the Global Consciousness Project that he started with Roger Nelson, and to me that phenomenon is very pertinent to this whole discussion. And I really think that there's something to the quantum moment that consciousness, everything collapses and then comes back. And how else could, the Global Consciousness Project is random number generators, a network around the world, all sending the streams of random numbers back to a server in Princeton. And when large events happen in the world that capture people's minds by the thousands or millions, it shows up. There's non-random patterns show up in this aggregated stream. How in the heck can that happen, except that consciousness is affecting the entire material substratum of the whole planet, the whole system. So it's as if it's blinking in and out, and at that moment, that's when that occurs. So,
yeah. So in the model that I was presenting here, where we have sort of subjective holons moving through subjective time relative to objective time, you can imagine them all tethered together. Each one is able to move and has its own individual degree of freedom to move, but they're all tethered together, all sort of marching in this giant wave of consciousness, what Whitehead called the creative advance. And I find that general vision very compelling, and I think it is consistent with the global consciousness kinds of measures that have come up. Now, again, I still am not 100% persuaded by that data set, and I think that more careful scrutiny is important there. And I'll also emphasize one last point, which is another one of my big interests, which is something that emerged when I started studying parapsychology. So we did a study when I was at University of British Columbia that was kind of related to the studies that Dean Radin had done, in which we basically flashed people a image and asked them if they saw it. It was flashed very briefly. Half the time they got to see the image again in the future, and the other half not. And what we found is that if the image was going to be presented again in the future, people were faster to say, yes, I saw it in the first place. So they were basically being retroactively primed by events that hadn't happened yet. And we got this great effect, and I met Dean Radin after we'd done it twice, and he said, well, have you replicated it? And I said, yes, sure. We've discovered, we've got a robust effect here. And he said, keep replicating it, it will decline. And I said, what? He said, oh, yes, this happens in parapsychological research. You run a study, it works great. You run it again, it works pretty good. You run it again, a little bit less well. So he told me about the decline effect. We ran that study 18 times, and sure enough, it just declined. And then I started thinking about it. I realized that a lot of my mainstream studies have also, they're still there, but they're not as big as they once were. And so I now believe that there may be, I actually have more confidence that we will find parapsychological effects in the context of the way in which parapsychological effects go away than we will in the actual ones in the first place. I think that this decline effect may be a really, really telling characteristic of reality. And we're actually doing a major study right now, 4 labs. All the labs, these are mainstream researchers, they don't believe what we call in my lab, my woo-woo beliefs at all, but they respect the rigor with which we design the study. And so each lab is running studies, each lab is replicating each other's studies. Every study has 1,500 participants. Every study is run in 2 blocks of 750. So we can look at the first block and the second block and ask, Is the effect as big in the first block and the second block? And get this, what happens if you analyze the second block first? Is it which one was run first or which one was analyzed first? So we're going to look at this thing. I think there really may be something fundamental there in terms of the anomalies that will push this thing forward. And let me just close with a metaphor. I can't quite tie this in with this, with the model that I showed you here, but I'm working on it. And it just goes as follows. Imagine that you had a telescope, and you pointed that telescope at a distant object. So the object is going to be blurry. And what does blurry mean? It's going to be bigger. It's going to be fuzzy, and the fuzzy boundaries are going to include more visual space. As you bring it into focus, it's going to get it's going to shrink down as it gets into focus. It's going to get smaller. So there are regions which were illuminated by the object that are not there anymore. And I think this may be what's going on with the decline effect. When we discover a new effect, it's sort of blurry, and so we find it in places. But then as we bring it into focus, areas where it was, it no longer is. And I think that it's possible that there's something, we're moving through information space, and as we bring information space into resolve, it somehow in the same way becomes clarified in certain regions, but also disappears in others. And that means that there may be a sweet spot for effects, and that if you have your parameters pretty right but not perfect, it'll work at first, but as you keep replicating, it's going to get smaller because you don't have it right. You have to find the sweet spot. So this is more radical conjecture, but it's the kind of thing that I think we should keep open. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jonathan.
My pleasure.
Better than I had hoped for. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Really appreciate it.